Welcome again to Ancient Tales for today. Well, the last time we found out that even though God was leading Israel, the people started to look around. They looked here and they looked there and they looked everywhere, and they said, you know what? Every other country has a king, but we don't have a king. What are we going to do? So they wanted a king. Now the time goes by quickly. In today's lesson, which is number 83, Samuel is very old and he wants to remind them of something, 提醒他们. So stay by for an interesting story from Ancient Tales.
Story 83, Reminders. Some of us like to buy things to remind us of trips. These objects often have the name of the place we have visited written on them. In English, we called them souvenirs, which is actually a French word. We also need to be reminded of what has happened to us in life, so we can reflect on who we are and what we have done. Hopefully this will be all good. As he came to the end of his life, Samuel decided to remind his people of what had happened to them. Why? Because it is so easy to forget. Samuel reminded the people that they had begun their journey as slaves in Egypt, a hard reality, but something they needed to remember. They had been led out of slavery to freedom by following the command of heaven. Samuel went over what had happened to them while in the Promised Land, how that every time they stopped following the ways of heaven, they got themselves into trouble, how they needed to be rescued again and again. Then Samuel told the people they had not done right in asking for a king. He reminded them that they were meant to follow the ways of heaven, not a human being. But Samuel promised to continue to help them. Most of all, he told them not to worship worthless idols, but to follow the ways of the true God. Samuel was a brave man who chose what was right. As he reminded the people, he was an example of how to live. They needed to remember their history and see how they had been led in the past. Then they could have confidence in the present and the future. That is why positive reminders are so important for us today, too. We need to know where we came from and where we are going. We need to be reminded of who we are and what we can be.
Welcome back. We've heard the story. Now we begin. Now, some of us like to buy things. Do you like to buy things? Sure, I like to buy things if I can afford them. A lot of people buy things that they can't afford, and then they pay on time, 分期付款, which is not a good idea. But I would have to say that most of us probably like to buy things, but how about on a trip? 当你旅行的时候，你喜欢买一些新的东西 to remind you, 提醒你 of the places you've gone to? Well, these objects often have the name of the place you visited written on them. So 你去的地方是写在那个东西上. Okay? In English, we call them souvenirs. Souvenirs. 纪念品. Now, souvenirs is actually a French word. Okay? From the French language. Funny thing about English is this. English is kind of a composite of many different languages. You have French and maybe some Italian and Spanish and Latin, all the Romance languages. And then you have things like Greek. A lot of words come from Greek. Did you know that? 希腊语. Okay? Souvenir is a French word. Now, we also need to be reminded of what has happened to us in life. Do you believe that? I mean, 我们所经过的这个人生啊，要不要有时候有些提醒 ？Okay, what has happened to us? 我们所发生的事情是什么？ Do you? I mean, we can reflect on who we are and what we have done. Reflect is 反射, but in this case, 反省, 回想到 who we are, 我们到底是谁 and what have we done? Okay, 我们做的是什么 especially in a person like myself, who is quite old, almost 70 years old. You know, you come to a point where you sometimes sit down and think, hey, what have I done? Where have I been? Then obviously where you're going, of course, most of your life has passed already. I hopefully, that when you do 反省 and you think about all that you've done, I hope it's good. Well, when we come to the end of Samuel's life, he decided to remind the people of what had happened to them. This happens more than once. I think many people do this. Samuel did this. 他做决定要提醒他的 people, 他的子民 the people of his country, what had happened, 他们所发生的事. And why do you think he did that? Because it is so easy to forget. We say, my forgetter is very good. That's right. It's so easy to forget. So sometimes you need to be reminded. Now, Samuel reminded the people that they had begun their journey. 人生是一个旅行啊. They had begun their journey as slaves in Egypt. 他们的旅行是从埃及开始. There they were slaves, 奴隶. 他们是做埃及人的奴隶. A hard reality, but something they needed to remember. They needed to remember that they were once slaves. Can you imagine this? After many years, those people had forgotten. It may have been their great-great-great-great-grandfather that was a slave. So many things had been forgotten. Okay? Now, they had been led out of slavery, and they needed to remember all these things. This is a hard reality. Hard reality. 这个是现实，残酷的现实. But they needed to remember. They had been led out of slavery to freedom by following the command of heaven. Very important point. Very important point that they came out of slavery because of the command of heaven. Who was leading them? 天国是带领他们. It was God that was leading them. Now, this is a problem. You know, when we get so busy, well, you just think about it. When you get busy, what happens? You forget about the things you have to do. I have a secretary. Why do I have a secretary? Because my secretary helps me remember the many things that I have to do. That's the reason you have secretaries. They help you remember. But most of us don't have secretaries. So it's best to spend some time remembering. In fact, I like to say, take some quiet time every day. And I always start at the beginning of the day to sort of reflect where I've gone, where I'm going, things like that. These people had been led out of slavery to freedom by following the command of heaven. God had led them all the way. It's very important. Samuel went over what had happened to them while they were in the promised land. 已经来到这个应许之地, already in the promised land. And he reminds them of things that have happened to them. Already in the promised land. Reminders, reminders, reminders. Well, we all need reminders. The people had to be reminded, otherwise they would forget that God had led them. They forgot, could, 很有可能 forget that God had led them all the way to the promised land. There'll be more, but first we need some light on our path. Okay, for some light on our path, today we're going to look at 1 Samuel 12:23.
撒母耳记上12章23节。
As for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you, and I will teach you the way that is good and right.
撒母耳记上12章23节说：“至于我，断不停止为你们祷告，以致得罪耶和华，我必以善道正路指教你们。”
Now, the thing I think is very interesting about this is that here these people have made a bad choice.
对
他们的选择非常非常不好。
对
They don't want God. 不要上帝啊。They don't want Samuel.
对
And still, Samuel says, what did he say? He says, I will pray for you.
我不停的还会为你们祷告，
Okay, and I will teach you the way that's right and good.
我要告诉你们正道正路指教你们。
So now, what happens? Sometimes when we get mad, we say, "Ha, 你跑你的，我走了."
是的，艾老师，这个我让我看到了撒母耳真的是爱他的民族。因为有的时候我们被拒绝的时候，就像你说的，我们会生气。那好，你走你的路，我走我的路。但是他说，我还会继续为你们祷告，
Yeah.
我还会继续告诉你们哪条路是正路。真正的爱就是这样子吧。被拒绝了，我们仍然坚持爱他。
Yeah. So I think that's to use American way of saying it. It's cool. It's a great way of proving that he really loved his people. And even when he is rejected, 他被拒绝，他还是要忠心于他们。Loyal to them, help them, and pray for them. Now, Samuel is old, and he's reminding them how God has led them. He begins by saying, that every time they stopped following the ways of heaven, they got themselves into trouble. Now, you think about it. Little children, when they don't do what their parents say, what happens? They get into trouble. Okay? Mother knows best. Have you ever heard that saying? That's a saying. Mother knows best. 妈妈懂得最好，最多。Okay? Well, God knows best. And Samuel reminds them that when they stopped following the ways of heaven, 他们停止跟从天国的道路。They got themselves into trouble. 自己找麻烦。Okay, 造麻烦。They created problems for themselves. 陷入麻烦。They needed to be rescued again and again. I don't know. Someday I ought to count in the ancient tales how many times they got into trouble. And each time they got into trouble, they had to be rescued. 必须有人家来拯救他们。Or God, 上帝要拯救他们。So they just needed to be reminded, you created the problem and you had to be rescued. And then he came back, you remember in the last lessons? He told them that, he told the people that they had not done right. They had not done right. Okay? That means they had not done right in asking for a king. 他们是要求一个王. Actually, they demanded a king. Said, we want to be like the people around us. We want to be like them. We want to be like them. You know, see, you can understand. You say, you're making a mistake. God is your king. No, we want a king. He reminded them that they were meant to follow the ways of heaven, not a human being. 本来他们应该这个听从天国的指引 ，OK， 不是听从人类或一个人的guidance 指引 ，OK，follow the ways of heaven 在天国的道路 ，not a human created way. He reminded them of this. But Samuel promised to continue to help them. Now, he's already an old man. He said, even though I'm an old man and my sons are not doing so well, they're not doing so well, as they all knew. So I promise you, I will continue to help you, even though you made mistakes. I am willing to continue helping you. Wow. He loved his people. Most of all, 更多了. Most of all, he told them not to worship worthless idols. An idol? 偶像. Don't worship worthless idols. 没价值的偶像. Of course, they thought that they were worth something. But he said, idols are worthless. 这个无价值, 没价值. They're no good. They're not good for you. Follow the ways of the true God. 跟从这个真神的道路 ，follow the ways of God. Samuel was a brave man, 很勇敢的一个人。He chose what was right. 他所选的都是对的。I'm not saying that he was perfect. Everybody has problems of some kind. Maybe his problem was that he didn't 没有好好管教他的儿子们。Well, anyway, God is the judge. But he chose the right direction to go. He reminded the people he was an example of how to live. 他就提醒人们，他自己是一个榜样。Oh, not very many people can say that. How many people do you know can say, oh, I'm a good example? Yeah, I'm not sure that I would like to say that about everything in my life. Maybe some things, yes. He said, 我是一个好的榜样. They needed to remember what? How they had been led in the past history. 他们的历史 how God had led them in the past. 我们不要怕将来，就要怕我们忘记过去的带领。Isn't that true? We have nothing to fear for the future except we forget how God has led us in the past. Then they could have confidence in the present and the future. 他们可以信任，蛮有信任，信心，现代和将来。To be confident, to be hopeful. That is why positive reminders are so important today. 正面的提醒都是很好 because they help us have confidence in God. We need to know where we came from. We need to know where we're going. We need to be reminded of who we are and what we can be. 我们从哪里来？我们到底是去哪里？到底我们是谁？ These are all important questions that we need to be constantly reminded. Well, now we've come to the end of this lesson, and we come now to some words you need to know. In every lesson, there's usually a few new words you need to know. Stay by. And now for some words you need to know. First of all, I'd like to take a look at one here, souvenir.
Souvenir
Souvenirs, what are souvenirs?
是说一个纪念的一个纪念品哦。
Okay, 纪念品。Okay, when you go to a new country, do you buy souvenirs?
我没有。
没有。Okay. Now, it says here we also need to be reminded of what has happened to us in our life so we can reflect on who we are and what we've done and all this. I translated this 反想, I don't know, to think back about what we have done, reflect.
这个字呢，我也查了一下，他说的意思是，反应 reflect.
Okay, 反应, that's reflecting of a light. That's good.
对
I'm glad you
对
said that. But this has a completely different meaning. It has nothing to 反射, 反应. It's not reflect. This means to look back and to think about, to ponder, 思考，
那是
有一点思考的意思。
反馈，我们意思是说反馈 ，like feedback.
Yeah, we not so much feedback. We just think about
回想
回想。
回想。
OK， 回想。哎呀，你的中文比我做太好了啊。Okay, whoa, we've spent a lot of time here. Okay, to get themselves into trouble, to get into trouble. Okay,
这里是说的
陷入困境。
困境，对，陷入困境了。
Okay, now, so if I tell my child, stay out of trouble, 不要陷入困境，不要陷入麻烦，不要做错事。Okay, and one last one, worthless.
没有什么价值的。
Yeah, worthless. 没有什么价值。And that's all the time we have for words you need to know. Welcome back. We've come to the end of this lesson. These ancient tales, some of them are wonderful, some of them are sad, some of them have good lessons. In this one, I think the most important lesson is we have nothing to fear for the future except we forget how God has led us in the past. 我们不要怕将来，只要怕我们忘记过去上帝的带领。Wow. The next lesson is probably one of the most famous in all the Bible. It will be about an arrogant giant, 很傲慢的一个巨人, one of the most famous of all the stories in this book. And it's next time. So you won't want to miss the next lesson. See you then.
That's all for today, and thanks for watching. If you like Ancient Tales for Today, please visit atft.chinesehope.tv. You may also contact us by writing to ancienttalesfortoday@gmail.com. Again, that's ancienttalesfortoday@gmail.com. Tell your friends about Ancient Tales for Today. See you next time.